Hello, everyone. How are you? It's great to be here. My name is Antonio Lopez, and I am very happy to be part of this event, which I think is the best HR event in this year, probably one of the best events that have been put together. So please, as a starter, let me know where are you from, where are you connecting from. My name is Antonio Lopez, as I said, and I am the CEO and co-founder of VUCA, a startup consultancy agency that is based in Mexico City and helps companies and HR areas to be more innovative and better human-centered. So it's an honor to be here and to share the stage with three outstanding professionals who I'm about to introduce to you. We have Agostina Verni. Agostina is an HR executive with 14 plus years of experience at high growth multinationals such as Google and Red Hat, supporting business expansion in Latin America. Currently, she is HR head for Latin America at Napse, the subsidiary of Links, a Brazilian 4,000 plus employees technology firm that develops software for the retail industry. Agostina has a bachelor's degree in HR management from USAL University in Argentina, an executive HR certificate from Cornell University, and recently she completed the Certified Agile Leadership Program from the Scrum Alliance. She's very passionate about HR transformation for the digital age, and Agostina is a frequent speaker at forums, universities, and chambers of commerce around HR innovation, agile HR, and digital transformation. Thanks, Agostina, for being here. It's really great to have this panel with you today.
Thank you. I'm very glad for the invitation.
So we also have Ernesto Humpierres. Ernesto was raised in Venezuela and moved to the US a decade ago. He holds an electrical engineer degree in Venezuela and an MBA from the United States. He has worked in both Latin American and US companies. He currently works for Dell Technologies, but he's always interested in participating in initiatives that drive economic progress in our region, in Latin America. That's why he co-founded Cotopaxi together with Enrique Rubio to increase the dynamism of the labor markets of Latin American countries. Ernesto, it's really, really a pleasure to have you here in this panel. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we also have Nestor Marquez. Nestor has a solid background as an MBA in applied mathematics and doctorate in humanistic studies. His theme of research is actually the future of work in 2050. He's very interested in digital business transformation, the future of work, future thinking, in which he is an advisor and a speaker. He's executive partner and founder of FutureExperts, Institute of Exponential Growth, Therapy, Future of Work Skills Academy partner, and he is also a professor in the Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico, Universidad Católica in Argentina, PBS in Guatemala, and IEBS in Spain. Thank you very much, Nestor. He has been also acknowledged as a top voice in LinkedIn in 2018 and a top corporate influencer in 2019. Thank you, Nestor, for being here. It's really my pleasure to have you. Even though we live in the same city, it's great to have you finally and to get to meet you.
Hello, everybody. My pleasure.
Well, in order to kick off this panel, we have several people connected. I would like to ask you, in a very, very casual way, what excites you the most, or maybe what worries you most about the future of work in general, and maybe particularly in our region, in Latin America? Why don't we start with you, Nestor, if you're okay?
Okay. Well, there are many things to be worried and to be optimistic about the future of work, okay? So let's start with the excitement, okay? For instance, technology could bring us a lot of possibilities, okay? For instance, there are certain utopias being discussed around the world today about the possibility of entering into an abundance era, okay? So, because the technology can allow us to produce more cheaply, to participate more freely in politics, to discuss and disseminate ideas all over the world. So in that sense, the possibilities are enormous. Also, technology can free humans from the misery of certain jobs. And in general, I like to say that we hate jobs in general, okay? Why? Because we are obligated to do certain things, and I prefer the future when we have the chance to select the kind of things that we want to do, or the kind of discussions, or the kind of projects that we want to develop, or research, whatever, or start a new business, etc. But there are some worries about also the future of work. For instance, and especially in Latin America, okay? For instance, there is a concern that we may not have the tools or the skills to face the future in a very effective way. There are certain concerns if automation can take a lot of jobs or activities, and also if the workplace could become highly sophisticated and complex. And if we consider that 50% of the population in the world, and in particular in Latin America, well, they are almost living like that people were living 200 years ago, okay? To have an idea, for instance, we have an average poverty levels of 50% of the population worldwide, in particular in Latin America. And for that people, things have not changed very much. They have very modest houses. Probably they have soil as a floor. Probably they have a bathroom outside, but they are using a telephone. Yes. So in certain aspects, we are advancing very rapidly, and some other aspects we are moving slowly. So this is the challenge we have to face in Latin America and another part of the world, but more specifically in Latin America. And this generates a lot of challenges for individuals, for organizations, and for governments. For individuals, how these people can acquire those skills necessary for the future. For companies or organizations, how do they imagine the future they want to create for their companies, or for the society, or for the world, okay? And governments, how can they react to those changes who are moving very rapidly, okay? And they are adapting very slowly. So they are in the space of the governments, for me, are the major challenges. In my research in the Tech of Monterrey for my doctoral thesis, for instance, I'm studying very deeply what I call the properties of work. And properties of work are, one of the properties of work is sustain, because we receive the income to sustain our life and the life of our people working. Identity, when two persons greet or they have their first conversation, one of the first questions is, what do you do for living? Or, for instance, integration or socialization. Work was a space where during the last 200 years, people were meeting each other and making friends and discovering part of the world, yes? For instance, social mobility. People having a good career in a company could be growing your capabilities and growing your expectations and the wealthy. So there are many aspects related to the work. I identify almost 11. And some of those properties will change dramatically. And for governments, these changes will be very deep, and they will have to do a huge exercise in that scenario.
So I think you have put several elements that we have to consider. It's not a very easy topic. It's actually a very complex and very multifactorial topic. But in a personal and as a professional, as an HR professional, Agostina, what excites you or worries you the most about the future of work?
I think that what excites me most is we are now once in a lifetime opportunity to create meaningful jobs that integrate technology and really human skills into what people can do. And what not excites me that much or worries me is the inability that could happen in Latin America to articulate public policy, private efforts, and individual interest in tackling the issues, some of the issues that Nestor mentioned, in order to get to that future of work where we can find meaningful jobs and enriching lives.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds like a very common place for for us here in the region. I believe so as well. What about you, Ernesto? What can you tell us? Maybe even though you're Latin, you have been living in the U.S. for a while, but you are also aware of what's happening in the region. But maybe you have also a fresh view on the future of work in another economy, in another country. But in general, what excites you or worries you most?
Of course. Well, what excites me most about Latin America as we face these new technological shifts is that it's a very young continent. There's a lot of young people, and it's growing in its population. So it's almost like a blank slate, ready to absorb, if well channeled, all the new business models and work models and labor models that will be coming up in the next few decades. So we're a young, in that sense, I think we're supremely prepared to embrace the shifts that are coming. On the other hand, going back to a comment that Nestor made about the fact that in Latin America, you have some folks that are, well integrated into the economy, and you have others that live like we used to live 200 years ago. I call that the digital divide, right? I mean, despite the fact that they have access to cell phones, they may not have running water. And to really embrace the new economy that's coming, you need to be equipped at a certain level to stop thinking about the super basic necessities of life, so you can concentrate yourself on gaining skills and plugging yourself into the future economy. And I think that happens not only, what I'm most fearful about is that digital divide is not just within the continent, but I think as technology accelerates its pace even more, there's going to be a digital divide between Latin America and other more successful continents that are moving faster and embracing these new labor models, business models, and new paradigms. There are some signals that Latin America's labor productivity is actually declining, is not increasing, while other continents like Asia, Pacific, North America, even Europe, which is a very old continent, they're at least maintaining a stable or an upward labor productivity increase every year. But we are. So that's something that worries me.
Okay, fair enough. I think it's a great start to start analyzing what is going on the future of work from the perspective of three Latin Americans. And I'd like to ask you now, Agostina, do you think we are always seen in Latin America that we are always left behind in everything? Nestor and Ernesto have also mentioned this disparity, economically speaking, and how other regions are moving fast. But even, for example, when I speak to companies about the future of work or agility in HR, or all of the other topics that we have been discussing in this conference, it feels like we are left behind in many things. No, obviously the future of work and how to catch up on the future of work, it's also something that we feel we are left behind. The question would be, what is your take on this? Are we this far apart from other countries, other economies, other societies? And how ready you think we are for facing the future of work as we have been discussing it in this region? What is your diagnosis on this?
So we would like to start here with some data from the International Development Bank. They have stated that in Latin America, for example, in Argentina, we have 65% of the jobs that could be replaced by automation, and that number gets to almost 80% in some other countries such as Guatemala or El Salvador. So this is something that really worries me in terms of where we stand as a continent in terms of the abilities and skills our young or adults have in order to be able to be employable in the future of work. Then I think the second question was how ready we are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, let me just you mentioned earlier that something that worries you is the inability from governments, and Nestor also mentioned that, on catching up with a public policy or enabling people to stop worrying about the basic needs such as water, as Ernesto said, and be more productive in a new era, technologically speaking, and labor speaking as well. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it has to be an articulation between the public sector and the private sector. And I would like to double click on the second because I'm part of that ecosystem. And I think organizations have been for a long time consumers of in the labor market, right? They consume the skills and abilities that workers bring to the organizations. And we have to switch that mindset to a production mindset, right? How are we in organizations producing the right skills and abilities in order to equip our current employees and our future workforce in order to be ready for the future of work? So I believe that would be my take on this question.
Okay, thank you. Nestor, you were mentioning that these inequalities that exist, particularly in our continent, in Latin America, make more difficult for the future of work to arrive, right? Like people are still living in as if we were 200 years ago. And so what do you think about that on terms of how ready we are for the future of work? In earlier conversations we had, you discussed something very important, that many other countries are right now talking about what is the future that they want, but we still are concernings related to basic needs, to social development. So how ready we are for the future of work?
This is interesting what you are coming into the discussion, because in general, when humans, we do not like to discuss about the future in general. We like to talk about the past or even a little about the present, but it's very difficult for us to talk about the past, the future. So, but this is more important when we have countries like in the case of Latin America, that we are full of needs unsolved. So for us, it's we want to be present, we want to be discussing today, because we don't want to be dreaming. And the problem is that we are facing other countries, the US, for instance, basically the West Coast, Asia, and more importantly, China. These guys are thinking what is going to happen in not just in 10 years, 10, 20, and 30 years. They are discussing what is the kind of society that they want for the future. And we are keeping our discussions in the 40s, in 1945, 1950, okay? We are bringing back all the same discussions. And so we are like in a trap. So I think we in Latin America, we have to start making these conversations between, like Agostina mentioned, governments, companies, organizations in general. We have to discuss the kind of future that we want for our society, for our organizations, and start to build in those futures.
Yeah, I completely agree. We are not having those conversations. We are just flowing as the future arrives, and it's not a good strategy to just be let to be, you know, driven by what everything tells you. What's your take on this, Ernesto? You are from Venezuela, but you live in the US, where these kind of topics are really hot right now, and where, you know, companies are really moving fast on adapting to these new realities of work, of demographics, of technology. But you also are aware of what's happening in our region. So what do you think about this, on how ready we are for the future of work?
Yeah, I don't think we're super ready, but I think we have good potentialities, as some of my colleagues here mentioned. We have a big crutch. We have a big gap to fill, which is our governance. And we spoke about the importance of having good government and obviously a smart private sector pushing forward innovation and adopting new business models and new ways to do business and employ the workforce and skill it up, as Agostina was saying. I think the private sector can never fully deploy and bloom if the governance is not there. If the government is not at a basic level sufficiently stable and sufficiently welcoming of private enterprise to allow the companies to grow and to do the things that they need to do. So in terms of preparation, you know, how we get good governance, and it's a hard question. We've been trying to answer it. Argentina for sure has been trying to answer this for 100 years. Venezuela is probably the worst governed country in the Western Hemisphere, as you all know. And, you know, as long as we're trying to be democracies, I mean, Nestor mentioned China. They're not a democracy, so they can skip all these plans that they do for the 5-year plans that they put forward. They don't require any conversation with any sectors of society, right? But in our case, most of Latin America is democratic or quasi-democratic, right? Or wants to be democratic.
Wants to be.
Not fully. Not even the US is considered fully democratic, right? Yeah. But I think that if we're going to play on a democratic leaning field, we need to educate our people. And educate is not only about skilling up. I mean, I think skilling up people, it's going to be something that's very fast paced. I think Agostina was hinting that companies need to take kind of the responsibility to skill their employees and the workforce. And that's going to be very fast. As we get more changes in the economy and the jobs of the future get destroyed, or the jobs of the present get destroyed and then jobs of the future, you know, take hold, that's going to happen very fast. But there's a deeper level of education, which is the education for citizenry, that needs to be really cemented. And it takes countries sometimes 100 years to have enough people that are sufficiently educated in what democracy is to kind of embrace certain values that then allow you to have and elect good governors, you know, have good governance and set the stage. So how do we shortcut that? Like, how do we make that process that, for example, it's taken 100 years to countries like France or the United States? How do we make it shorter? I don't have a good answer. I don't know if you guys have a good answer, but I do think that starting with good government is a must. And then obviously good government will unleash through its public policies a very dynamic private sector that is willing to invest on its people, is willing to invest capital and build a capital stock on the economy, and it's willing to reskill the workforce and create new business models.
Great. I believe we have discussed about the jobs that will be automated, the governments that are not ready for what's happening in the world, particularly in our region. But we also discussed that we have the potential because of the young population that exists in most of our countries in the society, and the need to start discussing about this, no? Maybe we could, for at least for the sake of the panel, get rid of the government conversation for now. But
Yeah.
I would like to ask you exactly what Ernesto is asking, like what can we do in order to catch up? In terms of society, maybe Nestor, you can tell us a little bit about, maybe in terms of economy or population, and obviously in terms of companies. Agostina was saying about the importance of reskilling, but as an overall continent, no, as one of, I mean, it's one of the largest groups of people in the world. What can we do as companies, as a nature people? But the concrete question would be, what can we do? What are the key elements that we should consider to advance our organizations in our region, in this region, to catch up with what we need? So maybe Nestor, you can elaborate on this.
Okay. First, McGowan, Heather McGowan, she likes to say that the future of the work is learning. Okay, so this is, for me, this is a very important element that we have to bring into the discussion, because learning in the past was an activity of the governments, but more and more it's an activity the governments and organizations, companies in particular, and more is in the side of the own individuals. Now the individuals are, with all the platforms that we are having, now individuals can take the future of their lives and also the society in their own hands. So, and so in one hand, we have to, governments have to transmit the idea of the importance of learning to people, okay? So, second, it has to do with capability. Amartya Sen, he likes to say that it's not what you can do with technology, or it's not what you can do with economic development. It's what that economic development empowering you to do. So this is, it's not the economic development in itself, but the economic development, the possibilities that give to the people to be more free, to be more, to have more possibilities to do those things that they want to do, and to they contribute to the society and to the organizations that they participate. And just the title is the other capability very important for companies, is learn to unlearn. So on one hand, we have to learn, and on the other hand, we have to learn to unlearn.
Yeah, and that has to do with the idiosyncratic way of thinking in our society, in which hierarchy and, you know, tenure and seniority play a huge role in organizations, right? And the higher you are in the organizational ladder, the less likely it is that you unlearn, because you are very, very firm and very, you know, safe with what you do, that you don't want to unlearn what you already have learned throughout your life, and that's what taken you there, right?
Antonio, by the way, you mentioned that I think it's funny how Nestor went back to the idea that government has to partly push this.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard to detach a conversation about Latin America from the government.
From government.
But let me give you a practical example, though, of something that will represent a shift of paradigm in the private sector. It's something very practical that we can all do. And especially people listen to us that are HR practitioners, I think it makes a lot of sense to think about the example I'm going to give. So I've worked in Latin America and in the US, and I've left jobs in Latin America, and I've changed jobs in the US as well. And the approach is completely different. My experience of when I leave a job in Latin America, my supervisors and my HR people have always conveyed this sense of loss to me. It's like, well, we're losing you, you know, we're sorry that you don't have a sense of loyalty towards us, but you know, tough luck to you. Go and do your thing. Whereas in the US, the moment you say that you need to go somewhere else because you found a better opportunity, they embrace you and say, wow, I'm really happy for you. You know, you should definitely go pursue that opportunity. And I think this is partly a cultural thing, which I don't want to go into because it's very deeply rooted and it's very hard to change. We have to do with a lot of education or re-education over a long period of time. But I think there's also a problem of incentives and how the economy works. The labor market in the US is a very dynamic and fluid and very liquid labor market. If you lose a worker, the US has never, maybe once in its, you know, in the past 100 years have had an employment of more than 10%. The rest, you know, for 100 years, unemployment has been less than 10%, which is a good metric, right? I don't know if the same could apply to Latin American countries, but there's this embedded thought that the labor market is really liquid, and if you lose a worker, you can replace it very quickly with another worker. So there are no hurt feelings. Whether in Latin America, the extreme example would be Japan, where people work for life in the same company. There's a closer attachment to the employee and the amount of money you've invested in the employee. And therefore, there's this reticence to let them go. So I think as we diminish and dial down in Latin America those feelings and that approach, we contribute to liquidifying that labor market and reducing friction. And I think when a labor market has less friction, and we helped that is the case, people can move around and the economy can reconfigure itself, and the best workers go to the best jobs for them. Everyone has their best place to be, right? So we should be enablers of that frictionless labor market.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds though like it's hard to do, right? Like it has to do a lot with culture and how our economy is currently working. Unemployment rates in our region are not that high because also and maybe you have more data about this, but we are still in jobs that are, you know, very low technical, that need low technical capabilities. So we are manufacturing mainly and not adding a lot of value, but it has to do a lot also with the economy, the culture, and how we educate. In the past blog, we were discussing the importance of pushing the ability to train people, to reskilling them. And I know that Agostina has some experience on that, and I would love to hear from her what does she think on what can we do to catch up, Agostina.
Mm-hmm. I think we have to think in terms of ecosystems. When it comes to organizations, for example, it's not enough, as Ernesto was mentioning. We cannot do enough in order to be able to reskill, upskill. So we have to change our mindset and start thinking of ecosystems, and that implies working with other communities. Working with different types of populations, for example, retired employees, universities, startups, and even other organizations, sometimes our competitors, in order to be able to better prepare. And it will be beneficial for all of us, right? I think that's one of the issues. We have to start shifting, you know, our siloed mindset to a more of an ecosystem type of mindset. The second thing I want to mention is about young population, because we have mentioned all throughout the call the potential that we have. We are an emerging region. However, I do want to mention that 1 in 4 Latin American people between the age of 15 and 29 are working in jobs that are informal, or very low class jobs. So we have to be doing something around that. Also, we have 14% of those the young people that do not conclude either tertiary or university, versus we have around 50% of young people concluding that type of superior education in Australia, or 30% in Europe. So, and this is the type of workers, or the type of labor force that organizations will need in the future, with more skills, more robust education, right? So there I find something that we should be thinking and discussing. How do we make, how do we incorporate and we make sure that these young adults have the right education and the right possibilities in order to participate and to be included in the future of work?
Yeah, let me jump in on this question. It's not part of the script that we had put together, but it's really interesting what you're saying, that people are not well prepared, let's say, for facing this new era of work. But on the other hand, and that's, I think, my experience as well, Nestor was saying that accountability for being prepared is more on the side of individuals than it is in the side of organizations, schools. And we know of several platforms, several startups that are now offering very short courses and curricula that really add value to what the future of work and to what new jobs are demanding. So in this spectrum, let's say, where we don't have people, with university degrees or whatnot, but we also have the ability to learn and to learn to unlearn, as Nestor was saying. And what's going on with that?
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think?
I think there's a disconnect between our education system and what people and how people learn today. Anything. Like, they learn anything. We go to YouTube, we go to our internal networks, we use devices, we learn from different devices, and universities are not even near considering introducing artificial intelligence or virtual reality into the classroom, for example. So I think there's a big disconnect, and we should do something about it.
Yeah, maybe one way to do it is just to skip universities altogether. I mean, I love university.
Yeah,
and I
college
think there's always going
requirements
to be
in
space
jobs
for universities. But I do believe that, as Agostina is hinting, a lot of the learning is going to happen outside of the university, right? And if you can't change organizations that are 100 or 200-year old, you must just channel all that learning through other means. But I want to go back to the question of the informality that Agostina was saying. I do think that informality is one of the worst plagues that befalls Latin America. One of the main reasons why we always get behind. When you're not part of the formal economy, you're losing access to all the taxation, government action systems, healthcare. It's just the whole edifice crumbles. And remember when Nestor was saying that we live like some people in the region live like 200 years ago, is because even if the government wants to do some programs to help, if you're not part of the formal economy, it's just very hard to capture those employees, right? As employees, you can capture them as citizens that are very poor and you have programs for the poor. But if you want to capture them as employees, it's very hard through informality. And in fact, McKinsey and company calls this the missing middle. The fact that in Latin America, you have very large multilatinas or very large international companies that are very successful. Okay, Embraer, for example, it's a Brazilian company, very successful. And you have a very long tail of informal small companies. So you're missing that middle set of companies that are eventually going to become the super large companies and reap the benefits of scale, and therefore become more profitable, be able to inject and invest more in their people because of the economies of scale. And it's a big continent. I mean, I think 400, 500 million people. So there is opportunity for scale, but there's a gap there in the economy because of that informality.
Interesting. For instance, I think not that we are discussing about different approaches for education, like Ernesto was saying, like Agostina was saying. Probably we have to make that deeper and deeper and deeper. For instance, how many maker spaces do you have in Latin America identified where you can go and play and work with other people and have a cooperative experience and a peer-to-peer experience? Or how many of you have kids, or your son, or your sister, or your cousin, or the son of a friend who has a maker space in the school? And so they are practicing to inventing things and to working cooperatively. And for me, that is not very expensive. You can build a maker space very cheaply. Yes, but the problem is the mindset that we have. The problem is that if we don't believe in ourselves, and if we don't want to break the differences between the top and the tail, but now in this case of the society, the problem is not technology. The problem is that we are keep trying to keep all organizations, all forms of organizing society, and independently if we are talking about coronavirus or we are talking about the technology, we will fail. So for me, the solution for Latin America, I think we are the more human region on earth. So we have the capabilities for the future, but we have to trust in ourselves as individuals. And in the different levels of the organization, we have to trust. The top guys have to trust in the guys who were left behind, because that was a design of society, because in the past we couldn't make it better.
Yeah. So I keep hearing about the importance of culture and the importance of the mindset in our region to advance Latin America into the future of work. So Ernesto, you were saying something very interesting about these companies and how this mentality of embracing or congratulating, feeling great for somebody who leaves the company is very different on the US and on Latin American companies. Can you give us another example on how the future of work feels different in the US and in the developed world versus how it works in Latin America?
Yeah, I love this question. I think I've been waiting all my life to answer it. No, I'm kidding. So there's a big, no society is perfect, right? And every society is going to have its own idiosyncrasies based on its history, its culture, its constitution, right? So, I don't want to pass judgment on those differences, which are intrinsic to each group. But what I'll say this is that in the US, there's a higher level of trust between all the parties and counterparties. There's more institutional trust. So people trust more institutions than in Latin America. That's easy to understand. But also people trust each other more because the institutions are trustworthy. So people can transact with each other in the safety that their word and their papers or contracts will be honored. Their pledges will be honored, right? If someone offers you something and you say, yeah, sure, you can count more often that thing will happen in the US, because if not, there's an enforcement mechanism that is stronger institutions that will enforce those agreements between people. And that happens at an individual level, and that happens at the company level. So what I've seen, what that translates to more practically, is that the US is a country of early adopters. When someone comes to you and wants to sell you something or wants to offer you to try something, people in America are more ready, or they're readier to say, yes, I want to try it. There's less skepticism, like, you know, whereas in Latin America, there's a sense of defensiveness. It's like, well, is this person being truthful and completely trustworthy? Can I engage in a relationship and an agreement with this person without knowing them personally? Okay, because that's the thing. If you know someone personally in Latin America, you trust them. But if you don't have enough institutional trust to trust a stranger and to engage in commerce. So that for me has been striking, that difference. And how do you generate trust in Latin America? You know, you can start at multiple levels. Again, the government level is one way to start, but definitely companies themselves. One way that the Asian tigers did it is they created conglomerates because they couldn't trust on an unbundled supply chain. They had to have their own bank, they had to have their own supply chain, their own manufacturing, and their own sales organization. So the economies of, for example, Samsung, think about the conglomerate Samsung in South Korea, it's very bundled. So all the segments of the supply chain are under the same ownership. And that's a way they could go around the issues of lack of trust in the economy. In America, they optimize for unbundling. So one company does one thing, and you buy from that company to do the following thing and add value. Latin America, you know, if we find a way to find middle-sized companies that can bundle themselves somehow, or that can rely on platforms that allow them to reach that stage of growth, I think we can overcome issues of low trust. But I think that the root cause of some of the frictions that we see in Latin America is that lack of trust.
Okay, great answer. Lack of trust and the importance of creating new models for the economy to work at least in our region. You mentioned some very good examples from Asia and how is not the case in the US. Agostina, maybe almost to close this panel, I would like to ask you about the HR talking, no? HR speaking. What are the key elements or some things that as organizations in our function we can do to advance, to catch up to the future of work in this region, regardless of the economy, of the governments? So you were very interested on leading the conversation towards what organizations can do. And this is it. I mean, I like to ask you, what do you think on that? Do you think, what is the role of organizations on advancing the future of work?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have the 3A rule. The first A would be for HR to be aware, right, of what's going on. And for quite some time, we've been a department or area very focused on processes and policies and compliance, and not being able to step out of that and look into what's going on outside the organization, right? So first, we have to be aware, we have to be curious, we have to participate in different spaces to understand what the possibilities are in terms of the future of work. The second A would be to anticipate, right? Once we're getting aware of what's going on, we can anticipate some of the issues, the challenges that we may have inside the organization, and start creating and building solutions for that. And the third A would be take action, right? So needless is to say, once we are aware, we start anticipating, it's time to take action. To have courageous conversations with leaders, with our C-level, to get out of our comfort zone, right? To network with different parts of the organization in building those solutions. HR, within HR by ourselves, we won't be able to tackle this alone. So that would be my recipe for success.
Great. Thank you very much. So we are 10 minutes from finishing this panel, and I would like if every one of you could take at least 2 or 3 minutes for closing remarks and for telling the audience What do you think we should be doing? What can you conclude from this panel? Maybe we can start with you, Nestor, if you're okay. I think your mic is off.
Sorry, because there was a plane, so I put it in mute. I like a paper from Singularity University, Kate Salomon. She developed 4 blocks or circles, in that case, framework of the leadership for the future, okay? And she was stating that first was the idea of the leader as a futurist. And we covered some of that when we started thinking about where to go, because it's very important to know where you're going, where you're heading. Otherwise, it's very difficult. And this kind of moments put you in this situation that you have no idea where to go. The second element of this leader of the future is the leader as a futurist, the leader as an innovator. So if you know where you are today and where you want to go, then you can start building the bridges to connect the present and the future. The third element was very interesting, and is the leader as a technologist, okay? And in this case, it's important because the leader needs to understand what can you do with technology independently if you understand how it works, okay? But how to use it, where to use it, and to get what benefits. And finally, and I think for me it's the more important of the 4 elements, it's the leader as humanist, okay? And in this case, and in Latin America, for me, this is very important, because if we don't start to think why we are here, okay? What's the reason of a life? What's the reason of your mother keep you 9 months, okay, inside and make you grow and pay you for the university? And the only objective of a person or even a company is to buy possessions or get a lot of money. And I think probably there is something more. And I think this 4 element of the leader of the future is trying to understand that there are some other things where we are here. And I think we in Latin America probably we understand the 3 other elements, but for us it's very important to understand why we are here in Latin America and what makes us Latins.
Great insight. I really appreciate it, Nestor. Purpose, it's very, very, very important. Ernesto, let us know what you think.
Well, I'll just say that I think the meaning of life is important. So I agree with Nestor in that. And I think Latins will have their own answer to that question, which will be very different from other societies as a whole. And that needs to be taken as a virtue and used for defining the society that we want as Latin Americans, right? More practically, I think that since we're in an HR conference, I'd say that the HR practitioners have a very high responsibility on making the whole machine work. Because again, the data shows, as I was saying earlier in one of my first comments, that Latin America as a whole is losing labor productivity. And it has to do a little bit with the fact that we are commodity driven. We like to develop companies in extractive industries like oil or large scale extensive agriculture, etc., or mining, in Chile, for example. I think starting to move all that workforce into higher level or more highly skilled jobs is going to require a lot of effort from the HR ecosystem or industry, if you will. So there can be a catalyst for what the future holds, and they have to be open to, you know, if possible, as a whole, as a system, to hire more on attitude and culture and disposition, and not so much on an immediate skill. Because like Agostina proved during this conversation, reskilling will happen continuously all the time. So what you're really hiring for is for, you know, the capacity to learn. And the HR community and industry need to be very open to detecting that capacity to learn and funneling that capacity to learn to the areas where most value can be created in society and in the economy.
Thank you, Ernesto. Finally, Agostina, what are your thoughts on what we have discussed so far?
I would like to close with a quote from Santiago Belinkis, a prestigious author and speaker around these topics of the future and the future of work. And he says that in the past, or until now, we were accustomed to learning 100% of the time during 20% of our life. And he invites us, he provokes us, and he says we need to invert the equation, and we should be dedicating 20% of the time to learn 100% in our life. And I think this applies to individuals, but also, as we were discussing, to the whole ecosystem, to the private sector, to HR, and to the public sector as well.
Great, great, very inspirational quote, very meaningful as well. So it's important to, as an HR professional, as an HR practitioner, to take the responsibility for making the whole machine work, as Ernesto was saying, to learn and learn and learn to unlearn, as Nestor and Agostina was saying, and obviously also know what we are here to be very aware of our purpose, of the meaning of life. For me, it has been a huge pleasure to be here with you today, guys. It has been a great discussion. I hope we can follow this discussion elsewhere. And it's really good to have these kind of conversations and to be part of this, which I think is the most important HR event of the year. I hope you think the same. Well, very, very, very grateful to have you here. See you next time, and thank you all for being here with us as well.
Thank you.